everybody, and welcome back to the Flying Cat Marketing interview series. Today I have Josh Spilker from growthcontent.io. He's a B2B content marketing consultant in Tennessee. Hey, Josh, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks a lot. Happy to be here.
We met on LinkedIn and we've been pinging each other and interacting with each other's content
Yes.
until finally I was like, you got to get on the show. So I'm excited to have you on here today. Josh just launched his agency or consultancy about a month ago. So it's quite new, but you've been working in content marketing with Toptal and ClickUp, and you seem to have a lot of very interesting insights on keyword research and growth. So tell me a little bit about your journey into content marketing.
Yeah, sure. I guess originally I was like a journalist and editor. And so I did a lot of like traditional business reporting was kind of my niche, and talked to a lot of business leaders and executives kind of in that role. And then journalism, I realized, was like just had a crazy schedule with like not very good pay. So I started moving into like marketing roles. Started kind of at an agency as a copywriter, and then kind of got my feet wet doing that. Moved in-house to a few places, including a healthcare company where I kind of really learned formative and kind of traditional marketing. And so then I read a book about growth hacking and we were kind of passing it around the office. And so I got into like that type of world along with like SEO and content marketing, and put a few things together, and then got a position as like content marketer at a project management company before ClickUp. It was called Workzone. And so that was kind of my first like all in on like B2B SaaS marketing.
What growth hacking book was it?
It was that Ryan Holiday one that do you know him? Have you heard of him? He's
Yeah,
kind
I've
of
heard of
moved out of
him.
the space.
I've
Yeah,
heard of him. The obstacle is the answer.
yeah, something. He does all the Stoic books, but at first he was like marketing director at American Apparel back in like their crazy heyday in the, I guess, 2000s and early 2010s. And so then he wrote like an interview book. He wrote a couple PR books. Then he wrote a book about growth hacking, which was like, I think Sean Ellis and like growth hackers, and kind of like profiled those guys and kind of just had an overview of it. And then he just kind of has moved more into like the stoicism type stuff and doesn't really do as much about marketing as much. But it's a great overview, and it's a great book if like somebody, I mean, it's, probably like 7 or 8 years old now, but like if somebody's like, what is growth marketing? What is content marketing? What is growth hacking? Like a CEO or something, that would be a great like kind of overview.
Okay, so you read this book. At this time you were at Workzone.
I was at a company called Change Healthcare. It was
Okay.
a healthcare company here in Nashville.
And you read that, and then you were like, I'm going to start doing this for this company.
Me and my co-conspirator, I guess, she was kind of like a strategist, and I was doing like just some writing stuff. We were like, how can we kind of implement some of these? How do we measure a little bit better? How do we like track our email campaigns better and some of our social things? And really, we just started thinking about metrics a little bit more closely and really monitoring that. We weren't really in a position to implement a lot of it. We just got like really interested and just kind of started getting into like the internet communities and like looking around and stuff, and kind of not related, but maybe similarly, I got recruited to work at Workzone, which is a project management company. It's a little bit, I think it's like 15 or 20 years old, but like a 15 or 20 person place. And so then I got on the marketing team. The lead cycle and buying cycle was a lot shorter. So we're getting leads every day compared to my healthcare company, where it was like, $1 million deals to these large health insurance companies. So it was a different buying cycle.
Yeah, I guess that so how does that actually affect in marketing? Like, how involved were you in content marketing at the healthcare company?
Not very much at all.
Not very much.
No,
okay.
No.
Well, then I guess you can't answer that question really. How much content marketing drives the longer sales cycles? How does it help that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess technically I was, we didn't call it that, right? Because I'm doing like email campaigns, I'm doing brochures, I'm doing sales enablement, I'm doing PowerPoint decks, sometimes pitching in on RFPs. And so like, yeah, that's content. It's just not like search based as much. I mean, I'm editing newsletters, just all traditional marketing stuff. But, I just wrote about the differences between different content marketing genres, I'll call it, like brand, thought leadership, and then kind of education / what we traditionally think of as like search. And so all of that stuff does play together. It's just usually not very well coordinated. And sometimes we have different expectations for what a thought leadership piece should perform versus like an educational search-based piece. And so I think it's okay to have those different types. It's just like to understand the job of what each of those types can do and what the goal is from those types of pieces. So we shouldn't expect a brand oriented piece to like appear number one on some certain non-branded search terms necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing if they do, but usually they don't. And so it's just kind of separating those expectations and understanding, I guess, the job for each type of piece.
Yeah, I have been following how you separate those categories and those types of content pieces. So tell me a little bit about how you learned these categories and how they've affected the content strategies that you've implemented using this approach.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I've kind of fought against like brand and thought leadership a little bit because I didn't really even have a good understanding myself of like how the different goals like work together. And I don't think executives necessarily do either. Sometimes it's like, oh, we need this type of person on our blog. And I'm like, well, what's our objective here? Like, what's the goal? Like, we don't always think about that. It's just like, oh, we do need this because such and such is doing this. But in reality, all three of those do help your brand and your marketing. It's just kind of understanding that function. What really crystallized it for me actually, and I think I mentioned this in the piece, was Kieran Flanagan from HubSpot kind of put out these categories, and I just kind of expanded on them because I thought it was a really interesting framework for how we kind of talk about content today, and taking a step up from like the types of content. Because a lot of times we talk about like, this is a good social post, this is a good search post, this is a good email campaign. But taking it a step above and saying, oh, does this fall into like brand? Is it thought leadership or like commentary? Or is this more of like an educational piece? I think helps kind of those bigger buckets before you start getting even niching down even further.
So when you talk, because you also talk about keyword research hacks, and you have a piece about keyword research hacks, and a lot of the hacks that you refer to are transactional, bottom of the funnel. So, buying, comparing pieces, alternatives to your competitors, for example. And I'm totally behind that approach as well, depending on what the goals are, of course. But let's be honest, most of the goals these days are we need to get more demo requests or we need to get more free trials going. So those are the kind of things that you need to be paying attention to. And that kind of approach, where does that fall into within your framework of educational thought leadership or brand?
I think it's like, how do you want to accomplish it, right? Do we want to accomplish demo requests through search? If so, then it's like, well, you probably need like educational content. If it's like, hey, we're okay building up our brand and having these product updates, journeys or founder stories is kind of what I call them, like journeys to profitability. Those are some examples in my mind of brand, because you're talking about yourself and how you're kind of like building your business or whatever. And so you can get demo requests from that, right? Because people would kind of be interested in it. It might just be like a slower go. But I also don't think it's like one or the other. Like you can be, depending on the size of your team and kind of your interests, like you could be doing all three of those at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's just understanding the different priorities. But if you're like a scrappy startup or something, you're probably just going to want to pick one of those and then have your focuses like in other areas then.
For sure. So if I were a startup now, maybe not a scrappy one yet, but a growth stage startup.
Yeah.
I say, okay, Josh, sort out my content marketing. How do you get started on that?
Yeah, well, if you're asking me, I kind of I lean towards more of like the education and like search. And so that's like what I'm comfortable with. That's what I know to do. As whereas like somebody who has some really good capabilities in like PR or has a lot of connections or whatever, PR to my mind is more of like brand, like thought leadership. And so if you get that cycle going, then like you can grow that way too. So if somebody's coming to me, I'm just going to naturally, because my strengths and my interest and just what I like to do is going to deflect more towards like the education and like search type stuff. And so if that decision's made, then yeah, I'll start with my like keyword research hacks piece, I guess. But thinking about like bottom, mid, and then top, and kind of building out those different things first.
So a lot of what you're talking about right now, to me, is content marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And how does this tie back to the principle? I know that it's an old book by now, but I guess that you're still interested in growth hacking and growth marketing. How do you separate those? What is the difference between some growth marketing and content marketing or demand marketing?
Yeah, I mean that's like an ever changing answer to that, I think. I mean, I think growth originally started with product, right? And so it's like kind of building in these like viral loops or like networks or like uh, network effects like into the product. I think that's like the original thing about growth hacking. And now it's turned more to like, I guess, testing and growth testing as far as like running sprints or on like paid generation or demand generation, paid ads, or like, hey, we're going to change the CTA, run a test, see how it does. We're going to change this layout, see what happens on the conversions. Of course, like when I was at Toptal, I wasn't really involved in some of that, but that was like the type of tests they were running, like very specific on small CTA changes, small positioning changes. And so to me, that is more of like the growth hacking. I mean, content marketing can come in and like support some of that. But to me, I think now it's kind of emerged as two different things for sure.
Yeah. I also get that kind of vibe where growth hacking is just, we're going to do something for 2 weeks. If it worked, we scale it. If it didn't
Yeah.
work, we throw it in the trash and try something else.
Yeah. And I mean, you could try some growth hacks on your blog, of course, too. It's like, where do you put a CTA? Where do you put a call or the, sign up form? How do you structure your page? Like if you add a table of contents, does this help your ranking? If you change the meta description, does this change the position? If you change your meta title, does it change the position? Like things like that can be, quote, growth hacks as well, and tests that I think people should look at and be interested in. And that goes with optimization and maintenance and stuff too. So I mean, I guess technically that would be growth hacks for content marketing.
So what kind of other experiments did you guys do at Toptal, or what was your role there?
Yeah, at Toptal, I was involved in some like what we call like special SEO and content marketing projects. And what I was trying to do was find some new and different ways to like bring leads to the main domain. And I can't go a lot in depth, but it was trying out some like new keyword strategies, trying out some like different types of content to like capture a buyer who may not necessarily just search for like Toptal in Google. So, but yeah, I mean, we were very conscientious of keyword tracking, positions, impact of meta descriptions, meta titles. We did some work with like questionnaires and things like that to see how that captures intent, how that impacts, signups. So that was really interesting for sure.
What do you mean you did work with questionnaires? Like it's customer research questionnaires or?
No, like kind of semi onboarding and like surveying what the user might need or be looking for, and then like pointing them like in a certain direction. So it's almost like a guided onboarding survey process, I guess would be the best way. And I mean, I still think quizzes and questionnaires are kind of like a untapped resource in a lot of ways. And so based on like your answers and your parameters, like what do you need? So like if somebody came to your website and they had a certain budget and a certain need and they filled out all the questions like kind of in a friendly type form type way, then you could like sort your leads and kind of be like, oh, this is a good fit or not. Those type of things. we were working on that. And then that also usually increases like your time on page as well and kind of your user engagement. So we were looking at some things like that.
Okay. Toptal is a two-sided marketplace, right?
Yeah, that's right. So you have businesses coming in, and then you also are trying to attract what we call talent or freelancers.
And how did that affect? I mean, I guess you just have two completely different strategies.
I mean, yeah, they both roll up into, I mean, from the marketing side, they both roll up into like the same function. I was primarily focused on helping with businesses coming in, not so much talent outreach. Yeah.
And how many were you at the team there doing content for the business side?
I'm not really at liberty to say.
Oh
but,
yeah.
I mean, it was.
Please don't break any NDAs.
No. I mean, it's like a pretty. It's a pretty like sizable team for sure, and they've grown a lot in the past few years.
Okay, cool. So, do you have any lessons that you are at liberty to say, at liberty to share, whether it be at Toptal or at ClickUp, or just something that you tried, thought it was going to be great, wasn't great. Now you know how to make it better.
Yeah, really great point. I think there is a balance between like technical speed and like site speed and having good content. And I think a lot of people or businesses kind of fall in like one side or the other. And I think both of those metrics are like really important to look at. And so I will say at Toptal, like technical capabilities are like very important. And that was kind of new for me from like a technical SEO type side of things. And so they really helped me think about that. I will say like, you know, sometimes companies tend to emphasize one or the other. And I felt sometimes we may have overemphasized the technical speed sometimes for the sake of like some content things. And so striking that balance, I think, is always important. So yeah, that was one of the things I picked up from Toptal for sure.
So what's an example of that? Like you wanted to put some more design and you guys decided not to because it would slow down the website, or how can you sacrifice?
Exactly. So sometimes it is like, hey, images may help our engagement, but it'll slow down our website. Like, which one are we going to do?
Okay.
And kind of like thinking about that thoroughly, even though it may help. I'm speaking more like theoretically and hypothetically right now, but if we put an infographic in, like, yeah, that may help the user understand it, but it might slow down our page speed. So like, what are we going to do? And like, what's more important? And I think that is something that businesses and content marketers have to think through sometimes. And you probably have this healthy, I would say, tug and push and pull between product and marketers like on that, but it's always something to think about.
Yeah, for sure. And so what's now? What's in the future for Josh and growth content?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm trying to work with businesses that are kind of interesting to me, and I'm working with like some agencies on some like consulting type things. But yeah, I focus mostly on B2B SaaS companies. I like the startup companies. I helped ClickUp grow when I was there, and they just closed like $100 million seed round.
Wasn't that this week,
like,
right?
Yeah, like a couple of days ago. And I haven't been there for about a year or so, but a couple of my posts are still floating around there. So that was fun to really help take their traffic. I think when I was there, it was like increased by like 1,000% on the blog traffic. And so it was great to help them have a great foundation moving forward. And it's cool to see what they're doing still. And you know, when I left ClickUp, it was like 15 or so people. Went to Toptal, it was like hundreds and hundreds of people. So it's definitely a transition. And so now I'm kind of working for myself. So
yeah,
I've enjoyed that journey of kind of seeing how different organizations work.
That's those are all very different situations. You have so much support, I guess, probably in the 15-person team, right? Or do you have more support? I feel like in the large team, things might get a little lost, right?
Yeah, that happens for sure. I mean, at ClickUp, it was like, I'm writing a lot. At the time, I was writing a lot, doing all the research and just like handing it off to a designer sometimes, and then I was like pressing publish and, just going through it. And honestly, I mean, Toptal helped me think more about like bigger strategy, whereas at ClickUp at the time, it was just like, just do it and like move on. And so thinking about mistakes or maybe things I would do different, like when I was at ClickUp, I wasn't really, I mean, I was thinking about the funnel, but it wasn't really strategic and thoughtful. Maybe I was just kind of being like, oh, well, this is a good piece. This has good keyword volume. I think we can rank for this, and like just like spinning them out. And so I ended up getting some pieces that did address the different parts of the funnel, but it was a little bit more like haphazard, not like methodically building the list or anything. And so one of the clients I'm working for now, I can mention them, is it's called Friday app. And they're like a goal setting tool for teams and kind of communication tool. And so one of the things I'm trying to work with them on is thinking like, what are our bottom funnel pieces, like identifying those, mid funnel, top. And then right now, as I'm working through that calendar, it's like, how am I addressing the different parts? And then I would say too, what I'm working with them on that I didn't do as well at ClickUp in a more haphazard ways. I'm thinking through topic clusters, and maybe not like I have a pillar page for this specific topic, but I want to like exhaust this certain topic before moving on to the next one.
Yeah.
And so that's a big part of my strategy and thinking right now.
So how do you actually work on these topic clusters? Do you plan? I'm just trying to think, because I've been experimenting with I'm trying to think about how to phrase the question, because I've been experimenting with a lot of different ways to do a topic cluster as well. And for me, one issue that comes up sometimes is depending on how we're distributing the content, because I sometimes do want a variety of content. So I'm not always only focusing on search, for example. So if it's just search, I don't really mind writing a bunch of pieces on the same topic with different angles. You know what I mean? But I feel like if I'm distributing these through email, for example, as well to their readers or on their social media, at what point does the audience say, okay, well, you just keep talking about the same thing in a different angle, which is the part of building a topic cluster, right? So
yeah,
how do you, and as well as building, exhausting these bottom of the funnel keywords, because then I'm writing, comparing to this tool, comparing to that tool, competitor alternatives, etc. And while that is helping build out your content library and it's helping fill out that funnel, it's not particularly pleasant for your audience or people who are following that to only see that kind of content. So how do you balance that out in the content calendar?
Yeah, I mean, my first thought is kind of what I was talking about earlier, is that different content has different jobs, right? So everything that you publish on your blog doesn't necessarily fit like your email newsletter audience. And so I think that is one thing to think about, is like, what content are we actually sharing and which content are we promoting? And I just had a conversation about that with the founder of Friday, is just saying like, hey, not every piece of content deserves your like full promotion rollout. Because your audience like won't care. I mean, they will in like searches, but not necessarily for like brand and thought leadership engagement. So that's one thing. And then the other piece is just like, well, how important is the topic to your business? And if it's like super important, then yeah, like slice it every which way. And so the way I map that out is I think about what are the 5 top features, and then I think about what are the top 5 benefits that you have, and sometimes those match and overlap, and then kind of put those in like broader buckets, and then see and map the current content to those buckets and see like, hey, which parts of the funnel are already covered, which ones do we need to improve on. But ideally I want to like exhaust the topic before moving on to the next, but I don't necessarily know I don't know how practical that is, or if that's just like kind of ivory tower stuff that like won't actually work like on the ground or in actuality. But right now that's what I'm trying out, is like, hey, what if we just write about this one thing and then blow it out, and then eventually we'll have to circle back and like maintain it and update it. But like, let's try to really own this.
I think that's also a nice way to build out a plan. Say, we need to talk about this topic. Let's write about everything about that topic. Okay, now we're done. Boom. And it shows more of a progression for me. when I approach it that way, trying to exhaust one topic, I can see, okay, we've accomplished this milestone where we finally exhausted this topic, and now the next milestone is exhausting this next topic. And then it becomes a lot easier after that. You can feel accomplished that we've covered all the bases. Now maybe we can write about the fun stuff. I don't know. I think that that's a nice way to approach it, but it's also finding this balance between having a nice variety of content. How depends on the size of your audience already. It's a little bit easier if you don't, I guess if the brand that you're working with doesn't have a huge audience yet, because then you can focus, okay, it doesn't matter. Let's just build out all of this content, get it done. And then it just makes the roadmap so much clearer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Jimmy Daly from like Superpath and at Animals, the content marketing agency, where he talked about, are you building a publication or are you building a library? And if you're building a library, it doesn't matter like if you just do all of the history books at like one time, because people are coming at it from a different angle. But if you're trying to think about like a publication or, you know, a news or magazine type style, like, yeah, talking about those same topics, like and publishing those all the time will be exhausting and like is not really great for brand building. Again, it's like, what's your goal? Like, what is the job of this content? And like really thinking through that. And I think those are the conversations that people don't necessarily have. It's like, oh, we're just going to throw our blog in chronological order and just go with it. And I'm like, well, like, is that the best way? Like maybe we just have a blog front page that has different topics on it and people access it by like what they're actually looking for, not because they're like hanging on every word that you say. And again, but if you're taking a thought leadership like brand approach, then like, hey, maybe that is the way to go. It's just like, we're not having those conversations. We're like, oh, this is what a blog looks like. This is what resources look like, without kind of expanding some of those assumptions and challenging those.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting that you say this is what a blog looks like, a resources page, because now there's also this movement towards not getting rid of blogs, because to me a blog is just where you publish your content online. But that term blog, it's say, okay, we're not going to call it a blog, we're going to have resources, and then we're going to actually separate each category of the resources by the topic or the actual category that we're approaching. So then it kind of eliminates the blog part of it. Although yeah, for me, everything that you're publishing on your website in terms of free content, that's the blog, right? That's what, but that's also an interesting approach, is that at what point do we say, do we just get rid of the word blog on the website and divide it by the categories?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about that at Toptal, and I'm kind of in those conversations now, as you kind of have maybe these more section pages as your topic cluster. And then you may or may not have a date attached to it. I mean, dates are kind of, are important, but maybe don't deserve the same prominence. Like, because we're kind of importing the old like newspaper mentality in some ways over. It's like you have a byline, you have a date, and this is what the news is for the day. And so maybe not putting as much emphasis on those, but kind of thinking of it as like resource guides, library type approach, I think kind of helps break that mindset and open some new possibilities. I mean, there's some really cool, I wish I had some examples off the top of my head, but like there's some really cool like pillar pages that are not necessarily tied to any publishing calendar or publishing date. I mean, I'm sure the teams spent, you know, a couple months or a quarter like putting it together, but they're not stamping it with like, you know, 2020 or January 2021 or something on it. It's just there and it exists and they're regularly updating it. And so that approach is really interesting to me. The glossary approaches are really interesting to me as we kind of move forward with content marketing.
Well, Hotjar is a great example of a brand that does all of those things: the glossary approach, the pillar page approach, the guides.
Yeah, I don't read them very often, but I mean, I can definitely see them having that capability.
Yeah.
I mean, and then what's great, right, to bring it full circle is like once your content team is large enough, you can publish like timely thought leadership on top of undated evergreen research and guides and posts. And so like the best brands and content marketing will be like spinning out all three of those genres that I was talking about: brand, thought leadership, and kind of educational content.
Yeah. That's an interesting perspective as well, because when you prioritize, it's true that you kind of do have to prioritize at the beginning, at least, this kind of educational content that converts depending on what industry you're in. Sometimes there's just so much new things happening.
Yeah.
And you're like,
Yeah,
well,
for
I have
sure.
to talk about this new thing. I can't just
Right.
ignore
And I
that.
mean, like, you know, I back in April, I was writing, or we were like, kind of, how do we handle some of this like COVID pandemic stuff? Like, how long is this going to last? Like, I mean, now it seems silly, right? But then we're like, is this like a fad? But now we understand, like, hey, this is really addressing, like, if you're writing about workplace, remote work, team communication, like a lot of topics that SaaS companies have addressed. It's like, well, actually, you do need to go back and update all of your evergreen content to like reflect this, because it's a huge change and has changed what people like search for and do. And I mean, I think we all kind of come to that gradually, is like, well, actually, this isn't just like one little piece of news that'll fade away. It's like actually this long
Yeah.
lasting thing that we need to go back and change and maintain our content for.
Yeah. I mean, it's changed the world
Well, yeah.
forever.
For
So,
sure. For sure. And so that's like an example, a huge example of something that may have looked timely at the time has really actually impacted all of your pieces.
great. All right. Well, we're running out of time. So where should people get in touch with you if they want to talk to you more about your content marketing journey and that stuff?
Yeah, sure. I'm easily found at growthcontent.io is kind of the best place. I'm also really active on LinkedIn. My last name is a little crazy sometimes, but it's just Josh Spilker. You can
I
search
hope
me
I
on
said it
LinkedIn.
right. I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah, I think you did.
Spilker.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. So growthcontent.io.
Excellent. All right. Well, if you guys enjoyed this episode, please follow Josh on LinkedIn. Go visit his website. Share this episode with your colleagues, whoever might find it helpful, and give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And thank you, Josh, so much for
Yeah,
joining
thank you.
me and chatting with me today. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, thanks for having me.
All right. Farewell.